that we are gathered in the traditional sovereign territory of indigenous Coast Salish peoples, including the Lummi and Nooksack, who have cared for these lands and waters since time immemorial and continue to do so today. Their presence is imbued in these mountains, valleys, waterways, and shorelines. May we honor the original stewards of this place and participate in the care and protection of our shared home. My name is Daniel Kirkpatrick. I am on the board of the Bellingham chapter of the Climate Reality Project, and I'm basically standing in for our leader, mentor, and friend, Jill McIntyre-Witt, who had scheduled surgery and was unable to be here tonight, but has been absolutely a powerful leader in the climate action community in the Bellingham area. And we hope you'll all send her best wishes for her healing. She's doing fine, but she wasn't able to be here tonight. So I'm Daniel, I'm standing in for her, and I want to introduce Claire Fogelsong from the city of Bellingham, who's going to say a few words about the All In for Climate Week. Claire?
Hi, folks. I just wanted to say thank you for the sponsors that put together a great list of events for the week, including this one. This is the second year of our All In for Climate, our Climate Action Week. All In is a program we started in the city to encompass all of our climate education outreach and events, and this is part of that. So anyway, just wanted to briefly thank everybody for their interest. Thank the sponsors for putting together a great show, and carry on.
Cool, thanks, Claire. So thank you all for joining us tonight. We are facing urgent concerns on many fronts. 2020 has been the year that the pandemic forced us all to change many of our basic routines. But other patterns need to change too. We are hopefully finally grappling with the immense racial injustices in our society. And we are certainly in need of changing our lifestyles to address the rapidly worsening climate crisis. Between fires, hurricanes, droughts, and heat waves, the climate is demanding change. Yet, climate action must help to heal, not worsen, the rampant injustices that are tearing our society apart. That's why we're here tonight. With an eye toward broadband services and the internet that we all increasingly rely upon, we're going to consider how we can reduce our carbon impacts while also serving people better and more fairly. This event is hosted by the Climate Reality Project Bellingham chapter. And before we begin, please join me in thanking our co-sponsors, the Bellingham Quaker Meeting, 350 Bellingham, group of the Sierra Club, the Multi-Faith Network for Climate Justice, and of course, the City of Bellingham for hosting the All In for Climate Week. So we're about to start our panel. After all the panelists have spoken, we'll have a few moments for them to make a follow-up comment or question, and that will be followed then by a participant question and answer time. To simplify our sound and video issues, we're using the chat box for questions, so please post your questions there, and we will get to as many of the questions as we possibly can. And one final note, this presentation is being recorded, so if you have other people that you think will be interested after the fact, we'll be posting it to YouTube and making the link widely available. So, panel time. We're fortunate to have a terrific array of experts with us tonight to speak about how climate-friendly utilities can serve social justice. I would first like to welcome Atul Deshmani, Commissioner of the Wakam PUD. Atul?
Thank you very much, Daniel. I appreciate that. And let me just get rid of my background noise. I'm cheating. I'm in two meetings at the same time. So that's part of one of the artifacts of this current world we're living in. We get to participate in more, actually, in some cases. So thank you very much. I think that it's very important to talk about the importance of telecommunications, fiber, broadband, and all of that in the context of climate. So if I can have you're okay with that, I'd like to talk about that specifically in my comments. And what I mean by that is that we have for some number of decades allowed ourselves to give the telecommunications industry, the information technology industry, the devices industry, what I would say is almost a complete buy as it relates to the ecological footprint of the activities of those industries. The promise that we were made is that we were looking at a paperless economy, and that the trade for the paperless economy was almost a carte blanche in terms of ecological footprint. So everything from the devices we hold up to our head, the devices that we're using right now, through the all the back end that allows all of that communication to happen and all that processing to happen, we really haven't held the entire computer, telecom industry, devices industry accountable in terms of their ecological footprint. And in many cases, success is sometimes your worst enemy. And the ubiquity of these devices, and now the extent of the number of devices the average person has, the population of devices, and the way they are all communicating in this Internet of Things that is very much provides tremendous services and functions to us all. When you start calculating the ecological footprint of that Internet of Things, it is colossal. And we need to start thinking about that. And to me, the most important thing then is to think about how we move our data, how we store our data, of course, how we process our data, and how we move our data. And for me, it's an obvious outcome that fiber is the only way to do it in any significant degree. And which means that I don't believe that ultimately the right way forward is moving data with cell phones or Starlink, which currently is, by the way, in our community, several leaders in our community are suggesting that Starlink is going to solve all our rural connectivity issues, which is both technically incorrect and infeasible in terms of the science of it. And also, if it were even possible, would create a much bigger problem than a solution. So a lot of our thinking should be informed on the connectivity front, should be informed by concerns of ecological footprint, of which carbon is an important component. And I suppose that's the most important thing that I think is not yet quietly discussed in discussions around fiber that I'd like to offer to this discussion.
Do you want to say anything more, Atul, about what's going on with fiber optic in the Whatcom County area that you are elected to serve?
Sure. So actually, we were relatively early to explore fiber in Whatcom County about 15 years ago. The Whatcom County PUD actually had an initiative to start building fiber infrastructure. And without getting into too many details, it was a little bit of a field of dreams approach. I wasn't a commissioner at our time, so I could be more critical. But the approach is to build it and they will come. And we build infrastructure in this the urban area, the city. And the issue of demand and consumption of data was not carefully thought out. Now everything is in hindsight. And the PUD general manager at the time is a good friend of mine. I want to keep him as a good friend, but I believe that we had definitely a build it and they will come approach. And so we're still paying off $1 million of debt on that. We still have $1 million of debt, the PUD does, that we're paying off. So when I became a commissioner in 2018, it was elected in 2018, I had a tough job in telling my colleagues on, hey, let's look at fiber, and but I had a little help, and that was the pandemic. Now, you never want to say a pandemic is a helpful thing, but in one regard, it was helpful, and that is to motivate my colleagues at the PUD that well, maybe we do need to take it seriously, because there's no better example of connectivity problems than when, school kids can't do their work because they can't get connected. That's a crisis. That's a kind of poverty that we don't want to have. So that really motivated the change. And in position at the PUD, not to say that we were opposed to supporting the port's efforts, but we've been working through this summer. Our general manager, Steve Jill's been working through a strategy with the executive director of the Port of Bellingham, so that we can be more partners rather than cheerleaders for their efforts. So that's where we're at. There's a line being that's been planned that was delayed because of the stop construction effort because of COVID out to Glacier, and that line hopefully will now get underway. And that's of course just one component, because Glacier is a very important piece of it because they have no such connectivity. But of course, we need to cover the whole county. And not only do we need to serve areas that don't have any fiber backbone, we need to build fiber backbone to those areas. We also need to bolster and increase the redundancy of the fiber infrastructure in the city of Bellingham. And so some of the lines that need to happen are a line down Highway 9. So basically to allow us to create a ring with Skagit so that it actually doesn't just make us more robust, it makes SkagitNet, which is the collaboration between the port, the PUD, and local governments in Skagit County.
Cool.
I can keep going, but I wanted to respect the other speakers, particularly.
Well, thank you very much, Atul. You are out of time. You're correct. But you did a great lead in for both Isabel and Michael's presentations, which are upcoming. So let's go next to Isabel Meeker, who is the Family Engagement Director at the Bellingham Public Schools. Isabel, we're glad to have you. And the floor is now yours. Thanks again, Atul.
Thank you for having me. For those that don't know what family engagement is, I usually say I work helping connect all the adults that actually care about the success of the student to work together for that student. So, but today I wanted to focus on the part of my work that I'm actually extremely passionate about it, and is working with families that speak languages other than English. We have 52 different languages in our system. And as you can imagine, the pandemic has been devastating for many of those families. It has been like putting a magnifying glass and seeing clearly the disparity and the injustice that we have in our society because of, with the pandemic, we have seen so many things. And I feel like I can go on and on about all the things that are happening with our families, but talking about today about the internet connectivity, it has been incredibly difficult for many of our families, and we have seen the impact already in our kids' education because of the disparity with other families. So when back in the spring, when the whole remote learning started, we had about 450 to 500 families that were not connected, that the students were not accessing anything because they have no connectivity. And we have to think about that was 400 to 500 families. Some of those families have, 2, 3, 4 students. So we are talking about thousands of students that were not connected for a good part of the springtime last school year. So it was very intense work. Took a lot of people to be able to do to try it. I mean, we felt like we did pretty well, but it was pretty, it was a lot of work. Our executive director of technology went to work to finding resources. So we were able to connect with Comcast to cover the cost of Internet Essential for families that qualify. And we purchased hundreds of hotspots to be able to distribute to families that were not able to connect. You know, so we needed to have more than one options for families. In my part of the work, I was personally working with a team of like 15 people that we were calling families and trying to find families one by one to be able to see what we can do. And it was heartbreaking to hear the stories of families. Some of the families, by the time we got to them, they were already connected with really pricey internet, and they were basically, they got desperate, and they say that they were feeling bad because they know that they felt like their students were falling behind. So they were actually no paying and no buying other things that were like necessities to be able to for having their student connected to the internet. So we reached out to our Bellingham Public School Foundation to help us pay for some family. I mean, it was a huge endeavor. We have teachers that this, you know, when people got their stimulus checks, reaching out and saying, what can I do? I wanted to help families. So we have teachers actually donating their stimulus check for support for families. So that was what we were doing last spring. We are still working on connectivities for families. Just in the past 2 weeks, we have connected about 130 families that were not connected. And today, just today, I was talking to one of the people on my team, and basically we called the foundation to be able, there was a mother going to, heading out to get a payday loan to be able to pay her internet bill because she was, you know, not wanting to be disconnected. So we were reaching out to the foundation and trying to figure out how but that's the situation that we are seeing with many families in Bellingham. And I know that sometimes I'm a big cheerleader for our city and our community, but sometimes we don't see what really is happening to families. And I feel like connecting to the internet shouldn't be something that it looks like it's just privileged people are able to afford and able to have. I mean, many of our kids do. When we have families that have 2 or 3 kids in the family, now the connectivity is not all that great. They cannot be the 3 kids in one household. So we are seeing a lot with our families, and we are trying our best. But I think that until we find a solution as a community, as a country, we're gonna be seeing our kids that are farthest from opportunity falling even more behind and having less opportunity, and creating a worse society every day.
Wow, thank you, Isabel. That sounds like an area for a lot of attention and resources to be put for critical reasons. Really appreciate your comments. Our next panelist, if I can move on, is Michael Lillquist, who is a city council member for the city of Bellingham, and somebody who has an interest in broadband services. So Isabel, thank you again. And Michael, you're on.
Okay, well, thank you, Daniel, and thank you to the Climate Reality Project and 350 Bellingham Quakers, Sierra Club, and the Multi-Faith Network for Climate Justice. So indulge me a little bit, because I studied history in college, and so history is important. In centuries past, settlements and cities grew up around water. because water is both sustenance and transportation. And even today, cities like Bellingham are almost always located along a river or next to a bay or a harbor. Not so long ago, it was railroads that determined whether a community prospered or perished. If the railroad passed you by, that was a death knell to your community. Interstate highways and rural electrification have played similar role. So with each new generation of technology and each new phase of economic activity, the prosperity of a community and the well-being of the people in that community are tied together into the greater economy, or they are not. And people may fall behind in poverty and disadvantage. And until recently, with a shift in the presidency, there had been a growing consensus that internet access is the new essential utility for the 21st century, and that as a society, we need to treat it as such. So as a matter of public policy and to promote the general welfare, this country supported rural electrification and the creation of the interstate highway system and the laws and rules that govern power supply and telephone service, all as basic utilities. And basic utilities are public or quasi-public utilities, even when legal ownership is a mixture of public and private. And so regardless of what this president and his FCC officials think, I believe internet access is a basic utility and therefore a public good, and that it must be overseen as a matter of public policy and for the general welfare. And as with other regulated utilities, that does not necessarily mean public or government ownership, but sometimes it may be, and sometimes it may not. But what we have now is internet service that is nearly always privately owned and controlled, and more significantly, internet service is operated like a market commodity, not like a utility. The guiding principles are profit and marketplace advantage. Quality and accessibility of service are evaluated only in that context, and affordability actually cuts against profitability in many regards. And the private sector understandably tends to go where the money is, to serve unequally based on which customers can afford to pay, increasing the opportunity for some people and decreasing the opportunity for others. Remember that this country's original national computer network, the beginnings of the internet, was built by the US government and other public entities. It has since become privatized in virtually all regards. In my view, balance has been lost. And what has also been lost are the commitments to fairness and economic opportunity, to equity and educational access, and to the principle that the common good is exactly that, common to all of us and good for all of us. We all do better when we all do better, not when we exacerbate inequality, widen the digital divide, and leave some members of our community behind. And so as I see it, internet access that is broader, better, and more affordable is a matter of social and economic justice. And one way to get there is to realize that internet access is a basic utility and to acknowledge that our institutions of democratic government have a role to play. So what is happening here in Bellingham? After being stuck in neutral for a couple of years, there's new momentum in City Hall to look at what the city can do to support reliable, affordable, and high-quality broadband access. And the first thing to know is the city of Bellingham owns a substantial fiber optic network. But that network was built to serve the city's own IT needs and to connect utility stations and traffic control devices and to connect communication centers for 911 and radio dispatch. It was not designed to serve neighborhoods or business customers, and the coverage is not in the right places for that purpose. But the city's network could be a nucleus, a base from which a larger public network could grow, if that was our goal, and if we chose to make those investments. So how do we make those investments? We make those investments by building out the fiber optic network. And one way we can do that more efficiently and cost effectively is by what's called the dig once policy. Basically, the idea is that when you're digging up a street to lay some pipes or cables, you and other parties also install any other pipes and cables you might need in the future. It's future-proofing. It's built before you need something, looking ahead. In this context, it means laying down empty conduit for fiber optic cables, so it'll be quick and cheap to install fiber optics later. City of Bellingham already has some dig once practices, but these have been narrow in purpose and conservative in application. And they were guided by simple efficiency and a desire to minimize destruction of city streets. They were not guided by economic development or economic equity goals, and I think they should be. And so, as of just recently, the City Council has formally requested the administration now take into account community needs and general economic development as we plan our own fiber optic network projects. Basically, the City Council has said we need to expand our Dig Once thinking. And the second big step we've taken recently is the creation of a broadband advisory work group to be made up of citizens from a variety of backgrounds, both in the technology field and outside the field, for example, from the school district and the port. The purpose of this is to explore whether a municipal broadband model would work, and there are several to choose from, to meet our community goals. So let me just read you two of the parts of the purpose of that broadband advisory group. One, to evaluate the possibility of municipally owned broadband infrastructure as one way to further the goals of greater availability, affordability, equitability, and quality of broadband across the community. And two, assess existing conditions related to broadband access, equity, and affordability, as well as options and ways to use the City of Bellingham fiber optic network as it exists today, or as it may be expanded or improved to enhance access, equity, affordability of quality broadband. So right now, the mayor's office is accepting applications for that broadband advisory work group. If you are interested, or if you knew someone who might be, please consider applying to that work group. I look forward to the rest of the discussion. Thank you very much.
Excellent, Michael. Thank you so much. I can think of at least one other panelist that might be a good candidate for that, but I won't volunteer anybody else. Great. So it sounds like there's movement in the City of Bellingham. That's encouraging. So our next speaker, Gary Arsenault, is from Chelan County, and I guess the president of the Chelan County Commission, PUD Commission. And one of the great things about a Zoom call is we can draw in people like Gary that we couldn't afford to bring here by plane or car or train, but he's able to join us by Zoom. So Gary, so glad to have you. Thanks again, Michael, for your thoughts. And Gary, tell us what's going on in Chelan and what we might learn from you.
Well, thank you, Daniel. And Michael, you are a hard speaker to follow. You give such a great speech. I hope I don't step on my toes. But in Chelan County, we have broadband fiber network out to approximately 76% of our county residents at this point. And this has been a long process. And let me start off by saying, understand that by state statute, PUDs are not able to provide retail broadband service. PUDs are only authorized to provide wholesale service. So that means that the services are delivered to the home by an independent ISP, a for-profit ISP. So to kind of put this into play, how it works is we lay the fiber, and we advertise as we go through a neighborhood that fiber is now available in your neighborhood, with the hopes that people will then take that little flyer that we mail them, call an ISP, and set up a connection. We're currently at about 53% take rate. And what that means is that on average, when we lay the fiber and go through a neighborhood, we can estimate that about 53% of the houses will actually take our fiber. So, if at the end of the day, someone's going to pay for the installation of the fiber, and the more people that you have who actually take it and use it in their home, that brings the cost down for all users of the fiber. We do have a really good ISP here in town, the largest, who serves the majority of the homes. And with them, they work with us quite well. So we can help to establish with them low-cost fiber hookup alternatives. So if you think about your cable television, you can have a high number of channels, or you can have just the basic channels. And so we have brought this concept to this internet service provider so that maybe a household doesn't need all the bells and whistles, or let's say they can't afford all the bells and whistles, but they still want fiber for educational purposes in their community. So this internet service provider has structured packages that would be at the low cost end of the spectrum to provide that service to those that either want it, or like my grandparents who don't really know how to use it, but they want to play with the internet and they don't need all the bells and whistles, or somebody who might have a business who needs much more service. We provide broadband and in the gigabit speed range out to the residents of Chelan County. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we're currently at about 76% of the county. Last year, the commissioners at Chelan PUD authorized $25 million to reach out. Now, we're reaching out to that 80 to 90% range of a community. We think it's going to take about 25 million to get there. And just at the previous board meeting, commissioners authorized an additional $2 million, which is to fast track. It's an acceleration of installation of broadband. What it means is we don't have staff, so we're going to be hiring contractors to help us speed this process up. It is an expensive process. Chelan PUD has spent well over $100 million putting this in. As a matter of fact, you might double that number. And at the end of the day, our target is to have, as I said, 90% of the county connected by 2026. What that leaves us with is 10% of the county. And that 10% of the county is extremely difficult to reach. We're a rural community. We have residences that are way up in mountainous valleys. And so we are hoping that between now and 2026, that some of the technology that is being discussed now is actually able to be implemented to help us reach those individuals. Our ISP department, or our fiber department, is working with Microsoft on technologies that they see as in the future that are not realistic yet, that by 2026 possibly could be. So we're trying to roll this out. We are passing about 1,000 residences a year, and that number is probably going to be suppressed this year simply because of 2020 COVID impacts. It's put a lot of pressure on our fiber network and installation. But Chelan PUD is really a strong believer in the value. And Isabel, I think you said it earlier in your presentation, how important it is for kids. So at the very beginning of the year, we put hotspots out throughout the community, areas that we knew we hadn't served yet, working with our fire departments, our schools, and other agency buildings, granges, places where we knew we had enough bandwidth available to install a hotspot and then make it available for people that could drive up, bring their kids, be able to get some homework done, do some business. We had many of those situated throughout the county and still operate them now. As a matter of fact, our county also took that task on and expanded on installing hotspots, as did the school district. One of our most challenged school districts, Cascade School District, which is outside of Leavenworth, and very rural communities. You're talking areas up by Lake Wenatchee, very difficult to service and get to, and we're just not there in some of those communities yet. So those were areas we focused on, as well as areas up the Entiat Valley, putting in hotspots. So that's what we're doing in Chelan County. We really believe that providing fiber and bandwidth is similar to providing electricity. For those of you that may not know the history of public utilities in the state of Washington, I would urge you to try Googling it and listen to the history. That the PUDs were formed because big power companies from back east, they didn't want to serve the rural community. They were interested in serving dense communities where the maximum profit could be achieved. And so PUDs were formed by the Grange, who put in motion an initiative of the people, initiative number 1 for the state of Washington, for the creation of public utility districts to bring power to residential communities. And we feel that, or at least this is one commissioner that feels that high-speed fiber and bandwidth is no different than bringing electricity to the rural communities.
Wow, excellent, Gary. That was very inspiring, I think. You're doing a lot of what we might potentially be able to do here in Whatcom County in the future. So it's great to know that there are people that have walked that path before us. And also, I appreciate your reference to history, because the PUDs, you know, I went looking Gary, when I was trying to find you, I was trying to find a speaker from a PUD that had a lot of broadband, and I just zipped through PUD after PUD after PUD throughout the state, and there are many of them that are doing all sorts of amazing services for their populations, and I feel like much of that population is yet, much of that potential is yet unrealized here in Whatcom County. So thank you for inspiring us.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Great. So stick around. We're going to give you a chance for another comment in a little bit. But that brings us to our last speaker, Rosalinda Guillen, who's the executive director of a group called Community to Community. And Rosalinda, thank you very much for joining us tonight. And I'd like to give you the floor next.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's good to be in this space to talk about this subject that most people wouldn't think about when in relation to farm workers and immigrant populations in Whatcom County. And I know that this is a discussion mostly on the city of Bellingham, but a lot of our community lives in rural Whatcom County, right? And so I think that one of the things that is clear for us, and I think Isabel touched on that, even before the pandemic, the access to the internet was difficult for a lot of our communities. I mean, we were already dealing with that, but the students could do a lot of their work in the schools, right? Or they could access the library or go to these other places and use the internet to get caught up. But I think that this pandemic has shown how difficult the situation can get for our families. We've heard a lot from families about students, their children not being able to go to school. I think that that's the biggest issue. The other issue I'd just like to touch on is the whole issue of healthcare and how a lot of doctors and health clinics are now having those tele appointments right now where people are talking to their doctors via the internet, that they definitely cannot access that. So there's just multiple issues in, I think, you know, the explanation you've got here, underserved populations. And I think when you're talking about underserved, you're talking about underserved in more ways than just one issue or one need. There are many needs for our community. So we're talking about poor people. We're talking about people that speak different languages, people that have different cultures and different ways of communicating. And I think that this broadband issue is huge. I really like the idea of everybody talking about this being an essential utility or a public utility that everybody needs to have. While it is inspiring, for Gary, you know, he was talking about the way that Chelan County is dealing with the internet. It's disappointing to me that Whatcom County has not focused on the needs of those that are most underserved and most needed. And I think that it's clear, you know, from listening both on the PUD report and also the city from Michael, is that focus has not been there. And we know that as a member of the underserved community, we know that the city of Bellingham and the county of Bellingham, it's only been in the last few years that there has been a focus on the poor, the homeless, the houseless, definitely not the immigrant community or the farm worker population. And so there's a big gap in recognizing the underserved communities. I just want to put it out there that the pandemic has really doubled the pain and the suffering and this whole idea of people getting left behind. And I would just like to touch on that. We were already behind before this happened. So now we're in a desperate situation. Our communities are in a desperate situation, and it's come to pass that access to the internet is survival for many of us in many ways. So I think that these discussions are important because the priority for this needs to be raised. I honestly don't know how to do that, how that can happen. We know that it's possible. We know that if the city and the county look at their budgets and their capacity, they have the resources to make this work somehow. And we could at least get started. I mean, listening to Isabel, while you can say it's inspiring and Isabel is an amazing person, I think it's frustrating to me that she had to go to such lengths to literally seek out individual families to ensure that they were accessing the internet. I think that's a structural, governmental structural issue that has not been addressed, that has caused this kind of desperation in good people like Isabel to try to provide this access to our community. And while she's heroic, it shouldn't be that way. She shouldn't have to do that. She should have a whole team. The families should have been prepared already. And I really want to congratulate Gary that in your community, you actually thought about it ahead of time and had the ability to be able to provide some kind of support, knowing that something was happening. When we're talking about the broadband and, we're looking at, this is a panel put on by the Climate Reality Project. Brothers and sisters and community members, climate change is a reality. And folks like Jill McIntyre and others, and in my organization too, we've been talking about the climate reality that's impacting our communities, the fires that actually helped to kill a farm worker in Whatcom County. There is a reality hitting us all the time, that there is really very little excuse that this hasn't been addressed on a governmental structure, in a governmental structural way, so that we can deal with it. We can no longer ignore it. And if we ignore it, it's because we choose to ignore it. So the internet and access to internet to all families is going to become more important. But we really also, and I think many of you have mentioned that, you need to consider how you're going to develop this infrastructure, knowing that this climate change crisis is going to continue to happen in many ways, whether it be fires or floods and other ways. How you build this infrastructure is going to have to be done in a way that ensures that community like ours have access to it. So it's going to require innovation. It's going to require looking at the environment and where is the places that we're going to make sure that the internet is available. And I just want to have a plea, put out a plea for you all, because I've got the ability to do that right now. This whole idea of people getting behind, I think we can do something about that. As the PUD, as city leaders and county leaders, figure out a way so that our community is not behind. So that at the end of this pandemic, we come out of this, whatever it is, this crisis, our community does not have to quote unquote catch up. There has to be a way to understand that if some of these kids and some of these families are not where everybody else is, that there needs to be, that needs to be taken care of in a way that doesn't make our communities look like losers, or they were left behind, or they have to have charity or being taken care of, that it's not their fault. So I ask you for that dignity as you develop other needs and take care of other issues with the pandemic and the economy crash that's coming, that you don't leave our communities behind, that term not be used anymore, that we say we will not leave anybody behind in this economic crisis or this pandemic crisis, and figure out how are we going to do that, especially because of the lack of access to the internet that is so prominent in Whatcom County, all across the county. So once again, I thank you for this moment for me to speak. I agree that somehow this has to be an essential utility, but because it does not exist, that it be critical that our community not be left behind.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Rosalinda. Very, very articulate, very eloquently spoken. Yeah, so we don't want anybody left behind, and the only way to deal with that is to move forward, and to move forward in a way that embraces both climate consciousness and justice for the underserved and the people who are at risk of being left behind, or who don't have as many resources as some of the rest of us. So thank you very much. Panelists, all of you, beautiful, wonderful comments. I'm learning a lot myself as we go, and I'm sure everyone else is also. So now I'd like to go back to each panelist and give you a chance to make a follow-up comment or possibly to ask one of the other panelists a question. So we'll start with Atul.
After listening to Rosinda, I thought a story, a quick one. So in the last election cycle, one of the advocates for broadband and fiber infrastructure is a gentleman named John Humphreys. And he scheduled a meeting with some of the local elected, to be elected or people who are running for office prior to the election to talk about fiber. And I think it was either the mayor or the county executive who were at that meeting, one of the two of them. I was there, and then one or two others. And one of the candidates that attended via, I don't remember what tool the candidate was using, but it was a online connection. And also it was an online connection which had a real-time translator, which was also available via the internet. And I'm bringing that up because it was a wonderful example of the importance of good connectivity. And I'm in no way saying that the work that Isabel is doing and other people at the city and the county are doing in trying to get some connectivity is a bad thing. You know, by analogy, it's like if you don't have a grocery or decent grocery store in your neighborhood, I'm not going to hold up a picket sign saying, don't go to the crappy grocery store that you have there. You have to eat, right? So you gotta. So just to make clear, I'm not criticizing the efforts of people to do the best they can with what they have. Having said that handicapped candidate running for public office could not have participated in the discussion without the right infrastructure. And that infrastructure requires both upload and download capacity. And if you talk to the chair of the FCC, he makes fun of efforts of public for public infrastructure, and makes light of the need for symmetric connectivity. Basically, assuming that all of us just want to watch Netflix and so on, because that's fine. If that's what your goal is, you just need to get the data down. But if you really want to provide everything from healthcare services to real communication services to work with your teacher, you need to have two-way connectivity. And so that is, I mean, to really provide the services that people need, particularly those who are experiencing challenges and difficulties, whether those are one kind of handicap or another, it's a physical handicap or a financial handicap that they're facing. There's no example that I can think of where we can level the playing field more effectively to unleash not just economic capacity of individuals, but also the cost burden of helping people when you don't help them when you could. So to me, that's why I want to continue to differentiate, because there will be attempts in our community to sell wireless as good as fiber. And I just want to educate you all to know that it's not as good as fiber. And PUDs have figured that out decades ago. And even though they rely on wireless, but it's not their go-to. It's the providing extensibility to an extremely solid infrastructure that is being provided through fiber.
Atul, thanks. I want to make sure everybody else gets a chance to make a follow-up comment. No, it's great. There's a definite theme emerging, not only the critical and inescapable essence of everybody having decent internet, but also the equity of getting it to the people who most need it and maybe can't afford it. So Isabel, on that note, you get a chance for a follow-up comment, or if you want to ask any of the other panelists a question, it's your turn.
I just wanted to say thank you to the rest of the panelists. Atul, thank you for your comment. It's really great to hear I can see your passion, and I think I'm very confident we as a community we are going to be making progress. I truly believe that we have a special community and that we were going to do something great. So Michael, thank you for what you said. Thank you for the work that you guys do at the city. I really admire your work. And Rosalinda and I has shared the work that we do with our families that most of the time don't have a voice, and we get the chance to be that voice. But we are getting tired. We're getting tired, and we want to see some true support from the community. And we come to things like this because we wanted people to hear the reality that our families are living right now. Because I think it's easy for us to go our normal life. We all have, pretty much all of us have good connectivity right now, and forget that we have families that cannot even afford to have it. And then we blame them that they didn't. I hear people saying then they didn't do what they needed to do to be better when they get when the kids get older. But what are we doing to support them now? So thank you, and like I say, I appreciate our community, and I think that we can do better, but we need to wake up every day thinking that it's not just about ourselves, but our entire community. If we want to get better, we have to bring everybody with us.
Beautiful. Well said. Thank you. Michael.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and ask a question. Gary, I'm going to ask it of you. How do you pay for all of this? I understand that public money is slow and patient money. I don't expect to turn a profit when I build a public amenity, but I do need to cover my costs. And we could put in a $30 million overpass, and no one's going to ask us to justify that expense. The financing for that is already wired in to our system, but it isn't wired in for building internet access as a public utility yet. So how do you pay for it? How do I convince people that that I can cover my costs? Especially if I'm building out like you are to farther communities who don't have deep pockets and are not going to be paying high rates. So thank you.
That's a good question, Michael. Let me start off by saying that originally, much like what I've heard earlier today, in the late 90s, we started a installation of fiber, but it was for internal purposes, much like the city. And that was to run a lot of our switches and our substations, et cetera. Around 2001, we decided to try rolling it out to the community and taking it to businesses, cold storage sheds, apple packing houses, places that we thought might really have value. So it was a test. It was a test to see if the value was there to support the financial cost of installation. And it didn't take very long to realize that, yes, that not only was the value there, but the demand was there. And as you pointed out, or I think maybe Isabel pointed out earlier, that COVID has changed everything with respect to the need and putting a spotlight and a focus on the value of fiber. So maybe, I guess I can't answer the question from a city standpoint. I can answer it from a PUD standpoint. And what we have done, and there were a lot of bumpy roads along the way. At one point, we went back out to the members of the community and we took a survey, and we continue to do this every few years. We go back to the community. Is this what you want? And we go through and create a strategic plan. And year after year, fiber is near the top of what people in the community want. So that's step number one. Number two is that you create realistic expectations of here's the cost. This is what it's going to, would you be willing to pay more for fiber? in the community. And you know, whether that delivery system is the city, the county, the PUD, whatever the delivery system is, it should be one. You should figure out which one is it going to be that delivers that product, conduct these surveys, and then look for the funding source based upon if it's the PUD. Are you willing to pay more in an electric bill for that? To subsidize this, because it's going to have to be paid for, like you point out, Michael. And this is not inexpensive. This is very expensive. And it's going to take many, many years to implement. So I guess what I would suggest to you is I can't give you the answer, but I can give you guidance that you should go out to the community, take surveys, and involve community leaders and community activists, and ask them the realistic set of questions. Are you willing to wait the number of years it's going to take to install it? And are you willing to pay for it?
I think another problem is that you probably don't have competitors where you run your service. We've got private competitors already in city limits who've cherry picked.
Well, and you know, that part of the one thing to consider is that, you know, any telecom can come in and overbuild our network. And we've got hundreds of millions of dollars at risk that they're going to come in and overbuild our network if they see financial value. And you're already there, in so much that some of the network has already been overbuilt or been built, but it's in the high density area where the profitability is. And that's similar to what I referred to earlier with what created the PUD, was the power companies were willing to light up the streets in Wenatchee, but they would not leave the city limits. And so the farmers would come to town and they would look at everybody, the women who had washing machines and they had light bulbs, and they go back to the farm and they have kerosene lanterns and they're washing laundry on a washboard. So you need to involve the community. You really do. You need to involve the community and find out what they want and what they're willing to pay for.
Great. Gary, thanks for being responsive to Michael. Do you have a final comment you want to add or a question to throw out?
Actually, no, I'm finding this very interesting just to listen to what everyone is saying. And I would also offer that if Whatcom County PUD has questions and would like to talk with some of our experts in our fiber broadband group, we're here to help. We reach out to other PUDs. We help all the time. We would love to be a resource and share with you, the mistakes that we've made along this journey to help maybe prevent those from being repeated.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Gary. We'll put Atul on that.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say, Chelan is an exemplary PUD. They are a leader amongst PUDs in being a resource for everyone else in the PUD community. And they get accolades within the PUD community. I just want to make sure I give Gary accolades outside the PUD community.
Thank you, Atul.
Excellent. Well, his presence here tonight is certainly testimony to that. Okay, Rosalinda, it is your turn to make a final comment or throw a question out. Go for it. I think you might be on mute.
When I was first asked to be on this panel by Jill, I was like, what? Broadband? What in the world? Why would I do that? And what's that got to do with climate change? And I think that a lot of folks look at it that way. I know that the immigrant community, the farm workers, some working, class, poor Latinos would find it difficult to participate or even to sit and listen to this type of conversation about something that is impacting them right now and in their lives. The need is there and they want to fill that need. But the understanding and the process of what it's going to take to get there is not reaching our communities. Even for me, I want to say that this conversation really in relation to the pandemic, climate change, and broadband and access to the internet is about democracy. It's about, people being able to participate equitably in these current times. There are a lot of folks being left out of access to democratic processes because they don't have the access, including updates on what's happening on issues such as this. So I want to thank Jill and the Climate Reality Project for inviting me I almost said no because I thought that's got nothing to do with me, and this is something that they should be doing. It's kind of like a technical thing, right? It's a technology thing that I know nothing about, but in reality, it's an issue that has to do with democracy and with social justice and equity in our community. And this is the new way that we have to really understand. And as long as if we don't prioritize this in Whatcom County and Bellingham, then in my opinion, then you're not prioritizing the democratic processes and the ability for everybody to participate, especially now with this pandemic and climate change, fires, floods. I mean, we got the list. It's not changing, it's accelerating. The climate change is accelerating, and we have to figure out how we're going to do this. And I think listening to Gary and how long it's going to take, for God's sake, let's get started.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Rosalinda. So a lot of what we're here for tonight is to begin, shedding light on this issue and helping raise awareness and helping people see the linkages between technology and climate and services that are just and equitable to all. So again, all of the panelists, thank you so much, because you have really helped move us towards greater awareness. And we'll talk about action a little bit later on. At this moment, though, it's time for us to move into a question and answer period. So first I want to encourage you all to come up with whatever questions you have, post them in the chat window, and we will get to as many of those questions as we possibly can. But the chat window is our route to do this. That way we won't have to be juggling cameras and microphones. We can just get to more questions with less technological glitches, we think. And so on that note, go ahead and post your questions. And I also want to introduce my colleague, Betsy Gross, who I should have introduced a long time ago. But Betsy is another board member of the Bellingham chapter of the Climate Reality Project. And Betsy is going to be moderating this next section, the question and answer period. And so go ahead and get your questions up. And Betsy, I'm going to hand this over to you to juggle questions and make this all happen.
Thank you, Daniel, and thank you to the 5 panelists. It was really, really fascinating conversation tonight. I'm so glad that the 5 of you were here and that you all have a different, it's like the 6 blind men with the elephant. You all have a different perspective and a different take, all of which are important on this really vital issue. The topic, as you know, for this night's event is, can climate-friendly utilities serve social justice? And so for all of you attendees, you have heard not only what the issue is, how expensive it is, how hard it will be to do, but you've also heard from our social justice advocates how important it is to do it. So now is your time to ask these experts, both experts, scientist experts and social justice experts, the questions that, that this conversation has inspired in you. So I see, actually, the first question I just want to acknowledge was asked and answered a little while ago, and that was, one of you asked how to donate. That was so sweet. Isabel, how to donate, if you want to donate to the school district to help out, I mean, it just broke my heart that teachers are working over their money from their money to pay for students to get online. So anyway, we have a question here. Let's see. No, we don't have a question. Do we have any questions for any of our panelists or any comments? Anybody want to make a comment?
There was a question for Gary having to do with climate impact calculations.
Michael, we really haven't done a specific climate study for the impact on fiber, but I will tell you one of the things that has become very aware to us is, and this is simply by watching the broadband usage since COVID hit. And we are aware that the demand for broadband has spiked incredibly. And we're not seeing that go down like you might expect at this stage of COVID and this late in the summer. You would think that some people return to work, but there's a lot of work that's still taking place online here in the county. And so you could draw a correlation to those are people that would normally jump in their car and drive to the office that are now working from home. So there is a benefit. We just haven't calculated what that benefit is.
I have actually a question, and it's for you also, Gary, and that is that one of your answers to Michael was that that it's really important to start a community conversation. That in order to make this happen, you need to get the community support. As Michael mentioned, it's easy to build an overpass, but to put in fiber optic big ones cables is a huge undertaking. What did you do in Chelan County to start the community conversation?
So we've tied it to a strategic plan, and it's a 5-year strategic plan that we do at Chelan County PUD. And at the very onset of that strategic plan, we invite the community to answer questions. So we'll send out postcards to all of the residents that are buy electric power from us, which basically is nearly everyone in the county. We also post it on social media. We have a group of folks that will go on the radio stations. We even run ads in the local television station, asking people to please respond. There's generally some kind of a carrot. If you respond, your name will be put in a hat to win a iPod or something. And so we've had great success at response. We're getting above average response to these kinds of questionnaires. And the questionnaires are structured to ask a variety of different questions, depending upon where the strategic plan might be leaving the previous strategic plan and what those issues might be for the future strategic plan. And every year it is included fiber, because fiber has been at the top of our list of responses among the community members of what's important to them. And so when you have community support, it's much easier to draw the connection to, well, this is what the cost is. We'll do this. We're happy to do it. It's not free. Are you willing to pay? And the response has been yes. So we have what's created what we call public power benefit in Chelan County. This is surplus money that we have at the end of the year that the commissioners are able to designate towards public power benefit projects. So the fiber program has been the recipient of those dollars now for a number of years. And that's where I mentioned we put an additional $2 million into the fiber program to accelerate the build out. That came from our public power benefit dollars that we have designated for the benefit of the public. So I can't tell you how important it's been for Chelan and how well it's worked out to have the public involved and endorse the project, knowing that there is a cost to the project. Now, of course, there are still people that would like to have had fiber yesterday, and we're working towards that. But and we've hired contractors to help our staff who can't keep up. But there's always a cost to the installation. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, yes, and we have now several messages. So let me, a lot of them are for you, Gary. But the first one that came in is one that it looks like it could be either for Atul or Gary, and that is, how does 5G fit into all of this?
Atul, would you like that one?
So 5G is basically a follow-on to existing cellular transmission. It's basic, and it's expanding the frequency band, particularly into higher frequencies. And it depends upon an extremely good underlying fiber layer to support the data requirements of 5G. And so some have confusingly described 5G as a solution to connectivity problems. It just begs the question. And as I've shared about my concerns about ecological footprint of communications, 5G also has a much greater ecological footprint because of the amount of energy that it consumes. And actually, on that subject of energy consumption, I'm working on some calculations on that purpose. They're not done yet, but I will hope to be able to share that information throughout the the community when they're ready. But basically, when you're sending a packet of data through fiber, you can imagine that it's a conduit that's designed to carry that data packet, and the amount of energy to move it a meter or 1,000 meters would be much less than from a wireless transmitter, which is sending a broadcast signal. It may have a beam shape, which is directional, which is, by the way, one of the focuses of 5G technology is to be able to beamform and send the emissions with the data in a more narrow band. But even then, it still fans out and still degrades over distance by several orders of magnitude faster than sending through a fiber optic cable. So there's a second ecological concern with 5G. Because of this fan out, the proximity of subsequent antenna for 5G has to be close, on the order of 100 yards at the most. And so anything that's in the line of sight between one transmitter and the next has to be cleared out of the way. So that's another ecological concern. So how does 5G, it's being, some folks are presenting 5G as a solution, as I already hinted at. Some people are presenting wireless as a solution to our connectivity problem. And to me, they just beg the question rather than actually solve the question, meaning it's a Band-Aid approach, and it's a Band-Aid that's kind of a toxic Band-Aid because it actually causes many other ancillary problems. For example, some people have talked about health effects of 5G, and my greatest concern is not about its impacts on humans. My greatest concern are organisms which have a high surface area to volume ratio, like microorganisms and bugs. And we already have an insect crisis globally, and I worry about the ecological impact of 5G transmission on microorganisms and bugs.
Atul, you've just touched on ecological concerns about 5G, and we have another attendee who has a similar question about whether or not there are ecological concerns about fiber optics.
So the life cycle of fiber is it's made from specially mined silica. And so one does have to mine to produce fiber optic cable. And some people have erroneously said that it's made from sand, and that's not the case. It's from mined very high grade silica. I suppose you could build a plant to work, make the fibers from sand, but then that would mean more energy input into the production process, the plant. That would make it. So there's a footprint. Fiber, though, if it's buried in the ground, it has a potential of lasting 100 years. If it's aerial, people say, I don't know, Gary, maybe you can help answer that part. But it's less, but also a significant amount of time. The second thing about fiber is that it has continued to be adaptable to new technology. For example, originally you could send data down a fiber optic cable and multiple data streams out of fiber optic cable, but now the number of data streams you can send on the same fiber optic line filament have increased by 2 orders of magnitude. So That has to do with a technology which is, people use the term multiplexing and phase multiplexing, basically, which allows you to just cram a ton of data down. And that kind of innovation is possible. It's kind of like what we do with Moore's law as it relates to semiconductors. So there's potential for continued use of the same piece of filament and fiber strands, and increasing the capacity data that we send down those, which makes it relatively robust technology.
Thank you. We have a couple of questions for Gary again. Gary, there's one person who wants to know if your 90% goal is a participation or a coverage availability goal.
So that would be a coverage availability goal, recognizing that currently we have a 3% or 53% take rate, and we're hoping, and statistics would indicate that the take rate will increase with time.
Okay, and another attendee says, actually this is from Christine Grant. She says, we have 2 public power communities in Whatcom. In Blaine and Sumas, these 2 towns own their power poles. Seems like doing aerial fiber would be cheaper in these places. Do you think these would be good places to start doing last mile fiber in Whatcom? That's a question for you, Gary.
I'm not really sure I understand the question. I'm sorry.
I think if I can clarify, I think what Christine's referring to is the fact that, Whatcom PD doesn't serve electricity. Blaine
Okay.
and Sumas do. And because they do, if we could get them a fiber trunk line, then they could serve retail or wholesale. The cities can do retail.
It's possible. What I would suggest is if you can deliver your fiber countywide through one entity, whether it would be your port or Whatcom County PUD or the county itself, I think you would have a much better adoption rate. And I think that you would have a better cost recovery structure. That whether you're a small community providing fiber or the entire county, your cost structure is going to be very similar. It's just that your ability to recover those costs are going to be limited in a small community. So I think if you're looking for success of your plan, you want to make sure that you cast your net as wide as possible to not just install the fiber, but also to do a cost recovery. The fiber is something that needs constant updating and maintenance. So the installation is only part of it. The other part of it is the ongoing cost to maintain it. And so you really do need to have a very wide, broad base of customers that you can spread those costs across.
Finally, we have questions for both Michael and Tool. Michael, it looks like you've started answering some of them in the chat function. But the questions are, what is one thing you could recommend that we citizens could do to move broadband forward
Really
in the city and then in the county?
Yeah, the Broadband Advisory Group was something that took a while to shepherd into existence. I think it's a lot like our Climate Action Task Force, which the council kind of had to force into creation and then wait patiently while they produced their results. But the Climate Action Task Force laid a fantastic foundation, which the city is now moving forward on. We've now picked the top 10 of those recommendations and we're moving them forward to reality. Maybe the Broadband Advisory Group isn't so grand, but that's the mechanism that we have chosen to use the wisdom of our community to help guide us as democratic leaders to then start spending public resources in that direction. So I really would look into the Broadband Advisory Group, and like with the Climate Action Task Force, you don't have to be a member of that advisory group, right? You can participate, you can watch, you can support, you can send letters, you can comment, you can, basically get the back of that work group if you like where they're going, or chastise them if you think they've wandered away from where you think they ought to be going.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Michael. Atul, do you have any words to the wise for Whatcom County? The same, how to advance broadband beyond the city limits? What can we do?
To the citizens of Whatcom County is a question, or is it to the leaders of Whatcom County?
They didn't stipulate. Maybe you could give us one of each.
Right. Okay,
What
so
can we do, actually? I mean, we're your audience right now. What would you suggest?
I think it's appropriate to talk a little bit about background before I say what I'm going to say. And it just a quick point. Well, Whatcom County is like a lot of other smaller communities, relatively small communities. And what I mean by that is that our population compared to that of Seattle or Portland or other cities like that is quite small. Yet our culture, our technology, our infrastructure needs are not that different from people in much more density, much more wealth density, and much bigger scale. And how that shows up is that our organizations, our governmental organizations, have limits to how much they can do. And in cities like Bellingham, staff are only able to digest a certain amount of things. And they tend to defer to corporate experts for the purpose of deciding how to handle policy issues like energy as it relates to climate. So our staff are dependent on what our utility would say. Similarly, our staff at the county and the city and so on rely on what the telecom industry would say about these, because they may not have the bandwidth or the resources to be able to effectively process the kinds of things that the community is asking for. And, I'm biased now. Here's my bias. I'm going to reveal my bias. I'm trained as an engineer. I have a master's in engineering. And I've always believed that in local government, we don't have enough technically educated people. And because these particular issues of how to know when a telecom company is serving their interests rather than the public interest, it's harder to know that if you don't have that kind of capability. So what I would say, what I would ask the citizens of Whatcom County to do, the citizens of Bellingham to do, is to ask for more technical advisory committees to exist. And what I mean, and so the committee that Michael talked about has potential of doing that. Let's see who's on that committee. Let's see who they put on the committee. But what's essential, you're pointing at me, okay. What's essential is to have people at the county level and at the city level who actually can tell when an energy company or a telecom company is bullshitting you. And you don't know that necessarily if you don't have someone looking out for your interests. So I think that that's very important. And I would say that it's something that someone like Rosalinda, don't let me speak for you, forgive me, you may not necessarily think you want an engineer speaking on your behalf, but maybe we can actually help you. We can be helpful in the social justice objectives that you inspire in this community. So that's my input. We need to have more technical people looking at the technologies and the engineering of what we do, because otherwise those things get used as excuses for stagnation and moving slow.
So on that note, actually, you're inspiring the last question of the evening, which comes from Henry. And this one I'm going to pose to Isabel and Rosalinda, which is, what if, what if Whatcom County and or Bellingham doesn't become interested in broadband? Are we going to ignore the needs of the rural population, or for that matter, the left behind population that needs broadband. So what do you suggest? What if, this is one of those what if questions. What if we try to launch, interest and support for this? What do you recommend?
You want
And
to go
those-
ahead, Isabel?
Isabel, you're on mute. Oh, there you go.
I hate to think that way. That's a really terrible, terrible thing to think that can happen. I think a lot higher of our community. I know that this is not something that is cheap. I don't think that this is something that we're gonna be able to accomplish overnight. But I think that this is something that we have an obligation with our future. Kids are gonna be the one taking care of us not long from now, and we are not doing any favor. So this is taking care of ourselves. So if we are letting our youth behind and not preparing them for the future, then we're gonna be facing those consequences. So I hope that people see it that way, in a selfish way, but if we want to put it that way, and in a way that people maybe understand that it actually is going to affect everybody. It's not just that population.
Thank you, Isabel. I realize I asked a big question in the last 2 minutes of this, so I feel bad about cutting you short. So a couple popcorn answers then from either Rosalinda or Michael. Would either of you like to answer that question very briefly?
Well,
popcorn
I
answer.
I just wanted to say that given what's happened with COVID and the fires, and what the community that we work with at Community to Community Development, and the response from state government and local government to the health and safety of my communities, it actually would not surprise me that this would not happen. And I think that the divide between the well-to-do, the rich, and the poor in Whatcom County in Bellingham is so big that the folks that need internet have it. And so until they don't have it, those of us that don't have it are having to do what we have to do to survive. Like, if it wasn't for people like, I'm sorry, I can't, Isabel, our community, our families would not be doing well at all. And that's just for a few, right? So I'm not that hopeful based on what recently the way that county and city government has responded to the needs of communities, both houseless, immigrant, and the poor. The responses have been very slow, and actually we have not been listened to that well. So I'm saying that is a reality, just like the climate reality is what we're dealing with. But it costs government more to take care of poor people, in my opinion, that it does to spend the money up front to have equity so everybody can take care of themselves. That's my belief for economics at the local level. This is an agricultural economy, so it's very similar to Gary's community, I believe. And if they could do it in Gary's community, we should be able to do it in Whatcom.
Thank you, Rosalinda. Thank you so much. Daniel, I'm going to turn this back to you. Thank you all for your excellent questions. They're really very appreciated.
Thank you, Betsy. And thank you again, panelists and everybody who asked good questions. All the questions were good. And there's an interesting tech discussion going on in the chat box right now that I won't address because we're out of time. No, we're actually over time. So again, huge gratitude to everybody. I spoke at the very beginning about the urgency of this situation. The climate crisis is urgent. I mean, we know how to do social injustice. Our culture is really good at that. We don't need to learn that. We have to somehow unlearn it and start shifting patterns. And that's always hard. It's swimming upstream. We have to make change. we all, in some way, shape, or form, I think we all have to become activists. We have to roll up our sleeves. We have to get a bunch of work done. We have to engage in public processes. We have to raise our voices. If change is going to happen, it's it will because we all did something very active and did something about it and worked. I think many of you here on this call tonight are already activists. You're already doing a lot, and I appreciate that very much. But we wanted to end with a few things. What can you do? We didn't want to leave that question unanswered. And you probably heard a bunch of things already that might guide you along that line. But here's a short list of things you might consider doing. You all who joined us for tonight and stuck with us. First of all, you can attend other All In for Climate city events this week. There's a bunch more events on the city website, and I'd be remiss if I didn't put in another plug for the other city events this week. Another one is we have many critical elections, many critical races coming up in the election next month, 6 weeks from now, whatever. It's a very, very, very consequential election in many ways. But one election or one race that bears attending to is our local PUD race. There's a PUD commissioner seat that is up for election. And being a PUD commissioner is not a big flashy job with lots of perks. I'm sure Atul could tell you, they don't provide a company car for him. I bet Gary doesn't even get a company car or an escort or whatever. So it's not a glamorous job being on the PUD, but it is a place where a person can make a real difference. And so there is a PUD race going on right now. And I really encourage everybody to take a look at this race. Mostly these have been kind of sleepers. They haven't gotten a lot of attention in Whatcom County. And that's largely because our PUD isn't really big and influential in Whatcom County, but it could be. And so I want to encourage people to take a look at that PUD race, consider the candidates, and vote for somebody that you think is going to best represent your interests going forward in the PUD. So that's an important one. Also, Michael made reference to the City Climate Action Task Force recommendations that are now moving their way through the city cogs and machinery. There was a package of recommendations delivered last December, I believe. What did you say, Michael? Maybe 10 have been prioritized. But as a climate reality project representative, I want to say that there's one very important recommendation that hasn't gotten pushed to the top tier yet, which is a feasibility study on public power. And so I want to encourage those who are in this audience who care about public power to raise their voices and encourage the city to think about making public power one of the top 10, one of those top tier priorities for attention. It's only creating a feasibility study at this point, so it's not terribly controversial, but if we're gonna move towards public power, it needs to start with a feasibility study, and the Climate Reality Project would certainly like to see that happening. If you're in Whatcom County and you're not in Bellingham, the county also has a climate impact advisory committee. And I think one of those members is here on this call tonight. But if you're not in Bellingham, that doesn't mean you can't get engaged in climate action. Go take a look at what this county is doing in the Climate Impact Advisory Committee. There's also a website that Bellingham runs called the Engage Bellingham website. It's another way for citizens to get involved with climate issues in the city. We also heard Isabel, thank you very much for recommending that people can donate money to the Bellingham Public Schools Foundation to help with connectivity issues. But I think we all know that the trick to getting in everybody and really making it a just act is not going to happen through a few random public donations, maybe even a lot of random public donations. It needs concerted public effort. Our governmental officials need to move on this, and we are the ones who can make that happen. So I really, again, appreciate everybody being here. It's been very educational for me, and I hope that, like me, the rest of you are inspired to move forward and take action. So thanks again to all of our guests. This has been recorded, and we're going to have the recording posted. I'm not sure exactly how we're going to let everybody know the link to the recording once it's up on YouTube, but we'll do our best to get the word out. And I think I have said everything. Does anybody have a final thing that I need to say or something I left out, Betsy? No good? Okay, thank you again so much for dedicating your Wednesday evening to us. Have a great evening and have a great climate week, and go do something. Go take action.
Thanks to our speakers as well. You guys were wonderful.
All right, have a good night.
Good night, Daniel.